days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback Podcast time. Time to talk about linebackers. And linebackers just got a whole lot more interesting.
Why?
Because, whenever a perennial 8-time All-Pro gets cut, and the 49ers have been rumored to have shown interest, it definitely changes the dynamics of what the linebacker room could look like.
Patrick Willis?
No, believe it or not, even though I would love Patrick to come back, it's not him.
Oh, that's right. It's that other dude from Seattle.
The other dude.
Not named Russell Wilson.
You mean not KJ Wright, who was very upset that John Lynch called him and offered him a minimum contract last year? No, this is his running mate, the actual good one.
Oh, Bobby Wagner.
Wagner.
That guy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that guy. Okay, well, hey, that's an option now. The Seattle Seahawks, it feels like, are in full rebuild mode. I don't want to fully commit to that statement, Ant, until they don't trade for Deshaun Watson with all those picks they have. But until that time comes, it looks like full rebuild mode, and they released Bobby Wagner. So let's get into this. Let's talk about these free agent linebackers. Let's talk about some options there for the 49ers, if this makes sense. And Bobby Wagner is the first one you got to start with, Ant, because dreams. I have dreams. One dream would be a linebacking core, Ant, that has Bobby Wagner and Fred Warner being able to seamlessly interchange and interface at the linebacker position in any way that D'Amico Ryan sees fit, meaning sometimes you can have Bobby Wagner on the interior focusing on stopping the run. Other times you can put him out in space and coverage, and you can do whatever you want with Fred Warner as well. You don't have to worry about blitzing one of them and not dropping the other one in coverage because both guys are elite at both skill sets. In a perfect world, this is the type of move you make to go all in, right? But again, there are other issues and other needs the Niners also need to address. You can't just focus all of your money on one guy potentially when you have questions at the cornerback room, right? Questions with wide receiver depth, questions with running back depth. There's a lot of things. It's really going to come down to, what's that money going to look like? Can you make it work? And with his age, you got to imagine the way he's been playing, he's probably got 2 or 3 pretty solid years left in him. A couple years ago, Ant, you remember on the pod, I said the bold prediction I had was that Bobby Wagner was going to start riding into the sunset here as his skill set starts to deteriorate and fade. How wrong I was, and he showed it yet again this year, that he is nowhere close to being on the steady decline in terms of his skill set. Is he as fast as he used to be? No. But can he still get sideline to sideline in a hurry? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think John Lynch and them will reach out to him. They probably already did. But that's to gauge his salt level. That's what they were doing with KJ Wright as well. How salty are you that they decided to move on from you? Because one of the easiest ways to get someone on your football team is to find that they have a grudge with their former football team. And one way to stick it to him is to join their rival. He knows the 49ers have a roster that's built to go far into the playoffs. So adding him to the roster is, very important, I'm sure, because he could do so many things. And I think there are questions that come up if you do bring Bobby Wagner. The questions that don't exist are how good this linebacker core would be with Bobby Wagner and Fred Warner together. This is Navarro Bowman, Patrick Willis type air. Like, these guys would be that good together. The way they were able to play together, play off each other, their understanding of offenses, they would be dynamic. I mean, they'd be able to handle everything you need to handle. But it does start to provide some questions about Dre Greenlaw, about Azeez Al-Shire. What are you going to do with those two guys if that sort of situation happened? That's only if you can work out the money, or Bobby Wagner is just salty enough to come and play at a low contract. The other thing we have to think about this is maybe the 49ers were planning on paying DJ Jones $8 million. Is there more value in paying Bobby Wagner $8 million than it is DJ Jones? If that is the case, maybe they move in that direction, because preventing him from going to the Rams or the Cardinals, who both have showed interest in Bobby Wagner already, could be just as beneficial for the 49ers. It is an arms race in the AFC West, and it's an arms race in the NFC West. Everyone's trying to load up and go after these championships. Seattle, looking like maybe they're falling off a little bit, going into rebuilding mode, is only going to amp up the intensity of Arizona, Los Angeles, and San Francisco.
You're not wrong, Ant. And I think that might be the biggest reason why you have to not kick the tires on this, but do your due diligence and make phone calls and start figuring out what that money is and start figuring out what your competition's doing. Because that is something that the Rams desperately need.
Yeah.
Is linebacker play. Linebacker play is a huge necessity. And you solve a lot of problems if Bobby Wagner is signed to your roster. And also Anta would really, really help the salt meter for Bobby Wagner to go to a team that just won a Super Bowl in his own division, right? To go against his former team twice, who just cut him and traded away a quarterback, 2 hours after he said Sherman is a prophet. All of it seems like too good to be true, right? And it definitely does feel like NFC West teams are going to be the I wouldn't say front runners, but they're the teams that are going to be the most interested, but also the most cautious, because there's a lot of other teams out there that I'm seeing that can pay heavy amounts of money still for Bobby Wagner that are drawing interest. It's like 12 teams or something like that want to go after this guy. Shocking. Absolutely surprising, right? That would be the case. We'll see what happens. But speaking of salt and the salt meter, got to talk about Jordan Hicks as well. Another NFC West linebacker, played for the Arizona Cardinals. They move off him, free up some cap space. This is a guy who tends to struggle in the pass game area and not the best coverage guy in the world, but pretty solid against the run. Does a lot of things in the blitz, very dynamic. Niners are very familiar with him and what he can and can't do. Maybe this is an option for depth in terms of adding to that linebacker room, taking some pressure off of guys like Azeez Al-Shire, but also giving him something to push. I think this would also be the case if you put a tender on Azeez, right, and someone were to go out and want to pay him a butt ton of money and bring him in. This might be an option to replace that.
It could be. I really do. I think that this linebacking core is pretty set in San Francisco. I think that there are options maybe for depth guys, but I think that they're pretty set on what they want. Now, Hicks is an interesting guy because I think he played very well. You had Zaven Collins come in. Basically, Zaven Collins took his spot. Then Zaven Collins had problems. And then all of a sudden it was Hicks' spot again. But he's a guy who's played very well. I think he's a prime candidate to land somewhere for big money because I think one of these teams is going to look at him as big value and think that he could produce more than he already has. So I think he's going to be one of those guys that may be tough for the 49ers to bring in, but you always have to gauge interest in these guys, especially when they played for a rival. And the 49ers have been signing people from Arizona for a while now. This is something, and linebackers like Joe Walker. I mean, this is something that they do. So I think you do gauge interest in Hicks, especially because he is a big name and he has a lot of potential. I just can't get off the Bobby Wagner thing because I can't get off the fact that there are implications there. And we've seen players from Seattle go a different way. And I'm sorry I'm already coming back to it, but you've seen Earl Thomas leave and take a big contract to go to Baltimore and it not work out. But you've also seen Uncle Sherm, make a little trip down south and come to San Francisco and him get treated with a lot of class, play for a little bit less money, but get treated in the way that he should and have an opportunity to go to a Super Bowl. Bobby Wagner at his age, is he just looking for a Super Bowl run? If he's looking for a Super Bowl run, it might not matter how much money those other teams have. He might feel comfortable playing in San Francisco with the 49ers, knowing that he's going to be playing against the same teams, 6 times during the season. So maybe that is something he's interested in. But I just thought it was something that we need to talk about is also the ramifications of. Let's say they did bring in Bobby Wagner. Are they now trading Dre Greenlaw? Are they now allowing Azeez to go in free agency? Or are they trying to, which one of those guys are they deciding to keep? Is it Dre? Is it Azeez? Are they moving on from both of them, Alex? I mean, what would you do in that situation if you signed Bobby Wagner? And let's not say a cheap contract. I've seen the $4 and $5 million thing. No. Let's say Bobby Wagner is $8 to $9 million that's his base salary this year, and it can go up in the future. Are you moving on from Dre? Are you moving on from Azeez? Or are you trying to hold on to one of those guys so your linebacker core is just crazy good for 1 year?
I think in a perfect world, you're trying to hold on to Dre Greenlaw. You're trying to hold on to Dre Greenlaw. You're trying to get those 3 on the field together at times in your base 4-3 sets, and then being able to rotate them out, right? Give Bobby some time where he can rest. Give Fred some time where he can rest. Give Dre some time where he can rest. Dre's coming off an injury-riddled 2021 season. So if he doesn't have to be on the field for 85% of snaps, you can get him on the field for 60% of snaps. You're in a positive situation there if you're the 49ers. I think ideally you're holding on to Dre and you're dealing Azeez. But I think the realistic situation, right, is that most likely you got to free up some cap. Of those guys, maybe Dre is a little hesitant to want to sign a longer-term extension for some money, and he wants a long-term extension. He wants big money, so he's going to bet on himself for 1 year and then go into free agency. In that situation, maybe you try and move Dre get a third round pick back or a second round pick back in return, and then turn around and just make sure you roll with Azeez Al-Shaair instead. I think that would be your plan B if you brought someone like that in. I think plan A is keeping those two together, obviously Wagner and Warner, with Dre Greenlaw.
Because if you put a second round tender on Azeez, is $3.9 million if he signs the contract. That is more than what Dre Greenlaw is going to make. Greenlaw is going to make a little over $2 million this year. Now, if Dre Greenlaw was to leave in free agency next year and sign a decent contract, which I believe he would, depending on that value, you could actually get a third round comp back. So is it worth just keeping Dre, cheaper option at a little over $2 million, and possibly getting a third round comp and moving on from him next year when you still would have Bobby Wagner and Fred Warner, and then you presumably would have another guy that you could draft, a third option, or you could already have someone that you're developing? Is that a better way to go? Now, I mean, that is all depending on if they were actually to sign Bobby Wagner.
Speculation.
But, I mean, there has been talk already all offseason about whether the 49ers needed to move on from Dre Greenlaw. I never really understood the conversation, because having Dre Greenlaw on your roster for a little over $2 million and the possibility of him going and fetching you a comp pick, you don't have to trade him, because what value are you going to get for Dre Greenlaw right now if you trade him?
Maybe a second, most likely a third.
More than likely a third round pick, which you would get in a comp pick as well. And are you sure you're going to get that? You don't know for sure what you're going to get out of Dre. He was hurt last year. So I think this is an interesting conversation. So let's take Bobby Wagner out of it real quick. And let's say Azeez and Dre Greenlaw. Are you one of the ones that's like me that wants to bring both of them back and roll with them for at least 1 year, try to get Dre Greenlaw under an extension? Or are you ready to choose Azeez over Dre and then move in a different direction with the third linebacker?
In no world am I ready to choose Azeez over Dre. If anyone who watched the NFC Championship game should not be thinking to themselves, Azeez is ready. We don't need Dre Greenlaw. The minute Dre Greenlaw stepped off that football field, the defense played at a different level. It truly did. And yes, Ombre struggled, and he did his thing. And Ombre Thomas, rookie cornerback, and big stage, bright lights, didn't necessarily play his greatest game, didn't have his best moments with San Francisco.
Yeah.
But there was just a difference in terms of coverage, where guys were on the field, and guys underneath being able to make catches and extend plays. They went to a third string tight end,
right,
and were able to get the ball out in space and have success.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up some stats here in a second, Alex, because I had saved these because I wanted to have this conversation about Dre Greenlaw or Azeez Al-Shaair, and they had put out some stats, and I'm going to try to find them real quick.
I'm excited for this. So while you find these, Cutback crew, let us know right now in the comment section below. Would you trade Dre Greenlaw? Would you keep Azeez Al-Shaair? Let us know right now. And while you're down there doing that, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell, because, look, we're a handful of minutes into this, Ant, and we still got a handful of names to talk about as well. So this episode is nowhere near done. We still got a lot of guys to talk about. Make sure you're subscribed right now. Share the video as well with the rest of the Cutback crew and the faithful, so that they know what is going on. Because this is an interesting conversation. This dynamic now with Bobby Wagner being available opens up a lot of questions, and it opens up this question about trading Dre, or maybe letting Azeez Al-Shaair go on into free agency. It opens that door and keeps it cracked now, whereas before I don't know if it necessarily was the case. All right, and let's get to these. I think you got them now, right, Ant?
We're good to go on the stats.
All right, let's take a look at these bad boys. Let's see what it says here, and you can read it off here. The tweet, by the way, and we'll try and put this in the pinned comment, is from @Mark_Faithful87 Ant. And what does he say? What does his breakdown say?
Yeah, so Dre in 948 snaps had 107 tackles, only 9 missed tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 pass defenses, 1 INT, 1 TD, 58 receiving on 71 targets. So he gave up 58 receptions on 71 targets with an 81.5 rating.
Okay.
Now, Azeez had 1134, so he had more snaps, 137 tackles, but 19 were missed. Oof. 10 tackles for loss, so 3 more than Dre, 2 sacks, 1 more than Dre, 7 pass defenses, 2 INTs, 4 TDs, but 90 receptions on 110 targets, 100.5 rating.
I think what those numbers show me is that Dre is better in pass coverage than Azeez, which is something I think you and I both already knew, right? And it also shows me that Dre is the better tackler in terms of like not missing tackles, which is something I already knew. It looks like, again, Azeez numbers are there. The numbers are there, and they're positive numbers. There's lots of positive things there. The tackles for losses, things of that nature. I don't think anyone would knock Azeez Al-Shaair and think that this guy isn't like a downhill explosive linebacker who can make big impactful plays. I think he does. I think this is a case for keeping both of them around more than it is one over the other. Would you agree with that or no?
Oh yeah, because I think there's explosive plays coming from Azeez.
Agreed.
Azeez is making the explosive plays. Yeah, 3 more tackles for loss. But I mean, you also take into account the number of snaps. If you increase the number of snaps for Dre, it's probably closer to the same. But I think that Azeez does some explosive things. Keeping those 3 guys together is important. Mm-hmm. That's what I would try to do if I was the 49ers. Now, picking between Azeez and Dre, we don't have to do. A lot of people have been coming to us and saying that, Azeez is better than Dre or Dre is better than Azeez. I think it's as simple as looking at it in the playoffs. Who played? Dre Greenlaw played the most downs. And I believe he is actually valued a little bit more by the San Francisco 49ers. But I think both are very dynamic, very good linebackers. And I think we'd be lucky to have that 3 guys together. Fred Warner, Azeez Al-Shaair, and Dre Greenlaw.
You're not wrong, man. I think those would be 3 incredible names to have together, obviously. You also could be pretty incredible with Wagner as well. There's a lot of incredible there, Ant.
Yeah.
But let's move on to some other names and other linebackers that are out there in free agency and going to be available for the 49ers to take a look at. Newly cut and newly available Kyle Van Noy, a guy we talked about last year, and there were rumblings that he could potentially want to come back to the West Coast and come back to an area that he's familiar with. Ends up landing back in New England with the Patriots. No one was surprised by that. Megan was the one that actually informed me about the cut. She knew right away. And she's like, what the frick are we doing? And I was like, well, trying to get younger at the linebacker position. I mean, That's the reality. You're trying to get younger defensively because you're trying to compete with all those speedy, talented wide receivers and mobile quarterbacks out there in the AFC. You're trying to be ready and be able to handle those things. So Kyle Van Noy, available. Depth option, nice. I don't know if I love this as much as I liked it last year, the idea of it last year. But this is definitely not a bad backup plan or backup option should things start to go awry in the, Dre Greenlaw or Azeez Al-Shaair camp. Maybe you feel this is a guy you can plug and play for 1 year and get some value now for either one of those guys.
Yeah, I think with Azeez emergence, it might be harder to have Van Noy. I think last year made sense because there was some talk about flexibility and him being able to be an edge guy as well. The kind of the similar role that they ended up bringing Samson Ebukam in for is what I believed. That maybe Van Noy could do, but then at a different, rate. I did reach out to my source that last year talked to me about, Van Noy, and yes, the source is completely tied in. And my source said that right now there's no talk about him coming to the 49ers. So this is not something that is happening right now, according to what I've heard. So does he want to play in the Bay Area? He would love it, but so far it doesn't make sense for the 49ers. And according to him, Van Noy has I've never seen any interest from the 49ers yet. So I'm going to go ahead and say that is probably not going to happen. Of course, my luck, it'll probably happen. But no, the source said it's probably not going to happen. As much as they would love it to happen.
I mean, I think everyone would love it to happen. I know I would. I know you would. Again, though, Azeez has made that very difficult.
Yeah.
Azeez has made it very difficult to go out and just grab somebody. It just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. So we'll see. We'll see if this ends up being anything else that comes of this, if this goes any other direction, Ant. But let's move on to some other veteran presence guys, some other guys who've been around the league, Ant, and done something. Alec Ogletree, another name that has been very solid with the Chicago Bears the last few years. He has been dealing with some injuries, and an older gentleman. Not stupid old, like not ridiculously old, but he's older. He's up there. He's in his 30s. Do you see this as a possibility? Could the Niners do this as just a depth sort of addition and piece in case of injuries to shore up going into the season, maybe like a 90-man roster signing? Because I don't think he'd cost more than a couple mil.
I think these are all signings that happen if you lose Azeez or you lose Dre. Yeah. And you need to bring someone in to be the third linebacker. I think Ogletree is one of those guys that's had kind of an up and down career where he was up. And I mean, he's one of those guys that when he came out of the University of Georgia, the guy could fly. And he was one of those impact players. And then they moved on from him. And he didn't have great seasons with the New York Football Giants, shockingly. But he's kind of come back, and he's kind of come back into his own. He's a good football player. I think he's going to get the opportunity somewhere. But if he didn't, and if you did lose Azeez or you lost Dre or you decided to move on from Dre in a trade, it might be a good idea to have somebody like this because he is a veteran that understands what to do. So yeah, you might bring him in because I do think he's better than the options that you got behind Azeez or behind Dre, which is Demetrius Flanagan-Foles. I just don't think you're going to pay, a lot of money for a depth piece at the linebacker position. I think they'd rather roll with somebody young and use that money to pay another defensive lineman or possibly a mid-level type cornerback.
You're not wrong there, Ant. That feels like this would be a move that only gets made if you lose one of those two guys. Either you trade one of them, or you lose one of them to free agency because you're not willing to put the tender or necessarily match, right, and just let him walk away. It feels like that would be the only way. Quan Alexander, though, maybe not the case, Ant, because he's not going to command a lot of money. He's 27 years old. Yes, he's been dealing with injuries, but he had a pretty solid season last year with the New Orleans Saints. Stayed healthy relatively for a good chunk of the year. That defense was lights out late in the season. And I don't know if you all knew this or not, Cutback Crew and the Faithful. He was part of that defense and did a really great job of helping them slow down the run game, was instrumental in them shutting down the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run game as well. This potentially could be the case. I don't know if anyone's going to want to pay this man a lot of money. I know he's 27, but he's got an injury history. He hasn't been able to stay healthy the last few years. He was able to stay healthy the last part of this season and the stretch for the Saints down the stretch of the last part of the year. But could the Niners be bringing this guy in to push and sort of kind of reestablish that linebacker room from a few years ago? Except this time, he's kind of the rotational piece of plug and play situations, and you're not having to rely on him on a bunch, and you're not having to pay him a butt ton of money.
I think that with him, it was more possible last year. I really do.
You think last year before Azeez came onto the scene?
Before the emergence of Azeez. And I think that, he settled in very nice with the Saints. I think the Saints would love to bring him back, but financially, does it make sense for them? We know they're over a barrel a little bit with the salary cap, but we don't know what's going to happen with the 49ers linebacker position. I think all signs point to them bringing Dre Greenlaw and Azeez back, barring them doing something with Bobby Wagner.
Fair.
So I think that that's what it's going to be. Now, if they did decide to move a different direction, if they got an offer they couldn't refuse for Dre Greenlaw, or Azeez got offered a lot, and they lost Azeez, let's say they did put a second-round tender on him, but they lost him, so they're getting that pick back, then yes, because he is better than the alternative, and that's what it always comes down to. What's your alternative? And if it's Marcel Harris, he's an unrestricted free agent, and then you've got Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, who's a restricted free agent, but is more than likely going to be under contract. I think you have to feel more confident with Quan Alexander in that situation. However, will Quan Alexander want to play 25% of the snaps? I don't think so. He's one of those guys that wants to be on the field all the time, so I think he's going to be looking for one of those roles. I think that there are other locations where he could go. He could land in Seattle. He could land in LA. I think those are possibilities for him where he could fly around and play linebacker and use his intensity on the field. So I think in those regards, that's another reason that the 49ers don't make a lot of sense for some of these guys, because they don't really want to play third fiddle to Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner. And I don't even know if Azeez does, but I think that keeping this rotation together for now is probably the most important thing for the 49ers.
The most important thing, right? You want to keep that front seven as intact as possible, add depth where you can, and not have to overpay to accomplish it. What makes some of these guys hard, and most of these guys that we're talking about right now are really only options if the Niners don't keep that intact, if they're not able to or don't want to, if they're trying to do something else, if they're trying to go with other guys, if they feel other positions are more important, then the linebacker room could, in theory, suffer depth-wise. And maybe they're not too worried about that. Maybe they're sitting around going, hey, we're going to be able to bring back in Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. We like what we saw out of him development-wise. Hey, we're going to be able to potentially go draft somebody. Maybe there's someone in the draft that they're eyeing that they think is a gem and is a steal. Or maybe there's, another one of these guys that is just out there in space that they feel is serviceable enough to go out there and do some stuff. You had brought up Ezekiel Turner in our pre-show stuff. What do you like about him the most? And other than cheapness, affordability, he's been pretty healthy too.
Yeah, that's one of the things I do like is affordability. And I like people that are going to be depth pieces that are actual, are depth pieces. When you bring this guy in, he's going to have an impact on special teams. The guy that can play in the middle, but he has, an idea of what's going on in this division. Coming from Arizona, you understand who he is and what he's about. So this is kind of what the 49ers do. They go and grab special teams players from other teams and use them on their roster. So you are looking to increase depth. And if you believe he's a better option than Marcel Harris, then it's an upgrade. So I think sometimes, that is what this is about. It's not always about just the guys that are going to start on the field, but the guys that are going to be depth pieces as well. And this is one that I saw that, hey, might have some potential there. You get him in the team too, and also work with, D'Amico Ryans and this other coaching staff. Maybe he develops a little bit more than he already has.
You're not wrong, and that's another name that you had talked about and brought up was Hardy Nickerson Jr. from the Houston Texans. Who, says the Cutback Crew?
Yeah.
Who are you talking about? Hardy Nickerson. He's going to be 28, but he has been around the league with the Bengals from 2017 through the 2019 season, with the Minnesota Vikings in 2020, with the Texans in 2021. He's been a little bit of everywhere. Definitely a guy who's not going to cost a bunch of money, but well-traveled, well-versed, played in some similar schemes, could translate over very nicely in San Francisco.
Yeah, he's a 90-man guy. You bring him in, you see what you got, and maybe he ends up, paying off for your special teams. But he gives you a safety net, being a veteran guy that's going to be on the cheap. So that's why he makes sense.
Also an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, of course he is. This is what happens. Now, he does carry a big name along with him. I mean, his dad was a very good football player in this league for Tampa Bay. Shocking. But anyways, I just think that this is somebody you keep an eye on as a depth piece. He's not going to be a starter. He's not going to impact this team on the field probably, unless it's in special teams. But he's somebody to keep an eye on because you do have to fill those roles. And every year there's a guy that they bring in, a linebacker or, another position that's going to impact special teams. And usually a linebacker, somebody like Joe Walker, they've done it before. That's why I did target a couple of these guys I wanted on the list that could be special teams guys as well. The 49ers don't always go and get, the depth guys for special teams in the draft, but sometimes they'll go get some really cheap options that are veterans in this league and know how to do it already.
That's true. And Alex Singleton would be another name to keep an eye on as well. A guy who moves sideline to sideline pretty quickly, would fill nicely in the special teams. Isn't going to cost a lot of money. Anton has started a lot of games in the league for the Philadelphia Eagles at the linebacker position. If something were to happen, if you weren't able to bring some of these guys in, it's another name to watch. A lot of options, Ant, but I think you and I are pretty set, right? This isn't Azeez versus Dre. It's not one or the other. It's ideally both, unless maybe you're going for Bobby Wagner. Unless you're going for Bobby Wagner.
If you're going, and this is we're gonna have a video about this, but if you're going all in and you make a move for somebody like Bobby Wagner, then you would have to decide between Azeez and Dre Greenlaw. Alex, I know you said you would go Dre. Do you think after that they would sign Dre to an extension, or do you think they would let him walk in the 2023 offseason?
I think your first inclination is to try and sign an extension, but you have a number in mind that you're not going to pay more than. And I think that number right now is about $5 million, maybe $6 million. That you're not going to want to go over like per year on the average for the salary. Just because you haven't seen necessarily everything out of Dre that you want to see. He wasn't healthy all of last year. For you to warrant paying him huge money. And if he's like, yeah, no, I'm going to bet on myself, then you're okay with that. Because like you talked about, right? If he has a monster season with, this Fred Warner, Bobby Wagner tandem, which, I mean, we would all expect him, right? You're freed up, guy. You are definitely freed up to go do whatever you need to do on the football field. If he has a monster season and someone decides to pay him a nice chunk of money, then you're going to get that third-round compensatory pick back, which is about what you're going to get right now anyway for him. I don't see anyone wanting to deal a second right now to get Dre. If this was a linebacker starving market, then you might be able to pull a second and finagle maybe a second and a fourth out of somebody in order to accomplish it. This is not a linebacker starving market right now.
No, and let me pitch this idea.
Okay.
So you could possibly bring in Bobby Wagner on a 2-year deal, let's say. And let's say you're keeping this number low this year. Sign Dre Greenlaw to an extension. But when you sign him to an extension, you have the Bobby Wagner money coming off the books just as Dre's big money's kicking in.
Smart.
And then you're able to keep the linebackers together, and you're able to keep Dre Greenlaw for the future. I think it's something that they should probably entertain. And maybe we're not thinking far enough ahead. So maybe you can actually have your cake and eat it too. Get that. Bobby Wagner, and then eventually still be able to keep Dre Greenlaw for the future. It could be something that's possible. Now, I know the 49ers don't like spending a lot of money at the linebacker position because you have Fred there. But anytime you have the opportunity to add somebody of the talent level of Bobby Wagner, it's definitely an option.
You're not wrong. It is 100% an option. The Niners need to evaluate and go through all the possibilities in free agency and all the possibilities to bring in Bobby Wagner and what that's going to cost you and, what it's going to prevent you potentially from having to do, or maybe you could sign. But Cutback Crew, let us know what you think. Are we dead wrong? It's Azeez over Dre. Or am I dead wrong? Excuse me. Is Azeez over Dre? Is it neither of them? You want them both gone? They're both scrubs, and we just need to go all in for Bobby Wagner? Let us know in the comments section down below. And while you're doing that, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any more free agent content. You don't miss any of the wonderful, wonderful free agency frenzy next week. Because, Ant, I don't know if the Cutback Crew and the Faithful is aware. A lot of crazy things have been happening already. It's going to get really crazy next week.
Oh, it's going to get nuts. I mean, this is what happened last year. Last year, and the wee hours of the night, Trent Williams, put on his Instagram that he was coming back. And, from there it sparked, because he had a little tag in there for Alex Mack. And then it was like, oh, Alex Mack is probably going to come too. It was something interesting and exciting. And I think that what's exciting about this is at some point, Jimmy Garoppolo, we're going to know what that return is. And everything's going to be exciting about that. But this team makeup is going to look different. No matter what happens, no matter who goes and who stays, and ultimately who they bring in, the makeup of this team is going to be different. And that's going to be something exciting and new for 2020.
You ain't wrong, Ant. It is going to be exciting and new for 2022. Like, speaking of exciting and new, the intro video, exciting, new faces, new peoples, doing what we can to keep things fresh around here. Let us know what you thought about that. And if you're listening on traditional podcast platforms as well, leave us that rating. Keep on doing that. Help support this wonderful channel, this wonderful podcast. Help us keep growing. Leave a review, hopefully 5 stars if you're listening this late and still enjoying this audible chocolate that's coming through your airwaves right now into your ears. Listen, we're excited about this. We still got a lot of some other free agents to talk about. Still got some other positions to address. And we got a wonderful free agency frenzy coming at you all next week, including some all-in videos that Ant teased at. So don't miss out on anything. We'll catch you on the next one. And until that time, Cutback Crew and the faithful, stay safe.
Remember, the right way
is always the 49ers way.